Hello, listeners. Welcome to BornCurious, coming to you from Harvard Radcliffe Institute. I'm Ivelisse Estrada.
And I'm Heather Min. On this podcast, we get curious about ideas and topics both consequential and sublimely pedestrian. That is, deeply meaningful within the most ordinary circumstances.
Today, we're tackling the latter. We're here with Beronda L. Montgomery, who is a writer, researcher, and science communicator, and a professor of biology at Grinnell College. She is the author of When Trees Testify: Science, Wisdom, History, and America's Black Botanical Legacy, which is hitting bookstores as we speak.
In the book, Beronda, who's a plant scientist, approaches Black history and culture through an unexpected lens, and we can't wait to hear more. Welcome, Beronda.
Thank you so much. It's a real pleasure to be here with you both.
Welcome. We're so excited to hear all about your new book. How did it come about?
The new book, When Trees Testify, has been a real labor of love. So it's called When Trees Testify: Science, History, Wisdom, and America's Black Botanical Legacy. And it came into being in a couple of kinds of ways. So my sister, one of my sisters is my best friend, and she and my son Nicholas and I often will travel together. The two of them conspire against me. They have the same love of foods. They have the same love of African-American history. In fact, I'm convinced I had this child for her. It's her child. And so whenever we travel, each of us has a kind of day where we choose our favorite activities, and I drag them around botanical gardens or arboretum or something. And we were in Charleston, I believe it was 2018, maybe 2019. And we had gone and seen all these beautiful trees and gardens. And they said, tomorrow we're going to go and visit a site of a former plantation. And I said, I don't want to go. I have land trauma. A lot of African Americans in the U.S. have land trauma because of just the history of chattel slavery. And they said, no, we oohed and ahed over every flower you showed us yesterday. We didn't rush you. You are going. And I prayed for rain. There was no rain. The morning we woke up, it looked like it was going to rain. I said, we shouldn't go out in the rain. And they said, we're going. So it was this constant kind of dragging along. And finally, we got there and I saw rain clouds. And I remember saying out loud, rain, we welcome you. And my sister said, that's a thought you could just keep inside yourself. But when we got there, as we were traveling, looking at the land and surveying the land, there was a huge oak tree, a southern live oak tree. This was in December, I believe. And I started to ask the guide about it, and they said it was estimated to be 400 to 600 years old.
Wow.
So in that moment, I just became fascinated with this long-lived tree and immediately thought about the fact that people who had been enslaved on this land would have stood with this very same tree and what it meant to be able to stand in the presence of the tree and understanding what I understand about, photosynthesis. When we exhale and our carbon dioxide is released, I thought their carbon dioxide was taken up by the tree, converted to sugars through photosynthesis, and ultimately wood. So their breath is captured in this tree, right? And so I became really fascinated with these age-old trees, understanding the science, thinking about the link to African-American history, thinking about my own family's history. So both my parents are from the Delta region of Arkansas. They were raised in the segregated South. So I just had this kind of collision of thoughts and ideas. And a couple of years later, when the pandemic emerged in 2020, around the time of George Floyd's murder in June of 2020, there was also an incident in Central Park of New York where a birder, Christian Cooper, had an incident with a white woman in the park. And from that emerged Black Birders Week, where African Americans want to say we bird and we're here. And then from that emerged all of these weeks where scientists from different disciplines wanted to say there are African Americans in these disciplines. So I helped co-found Black Botanist Week. And with working with the team of co-founders, I started to learn about other things that had happened in the U.S., about this fascinating story of apple trees that coincided with the founding of the first Black town founded in New Mexico called Blackdom. And so as I was kind of getting these stories, I realized that I had a longer project that I wanted to to really engage in. And so the book is now on 7 species of trees.
7 species.
That have
Okay.
relevance for African American history, as well as the shrub cotton. I couldn't write the book without including cotton just because of my family's own history with cotton. And there's actually a fascinating interplay between trees and cotton because much of the U.S. in the South was deforested to make space for cotton. So there's this interesting relationship of, trees being pulled out for cotton to go in. And so it's a book that really, there's true plant science. There's never going to be a book by me probably without that. There's science about the 7 species of trees and cotton, but there are also interesting ways in which those trees interface with the kind of Black botanical legacy in the U.S., which is U.S. botanical legacy.
Right.
Yes.
Can you tell us which are the trees rather that?
Yes. So there is, pecan is one of my favorite because of my family's history with pecan. There's willow, which has a deeply personal story I found out about my maternal grandfather. Oak, I mentioned apple before.
Yes.
Poplar has a storied history in the U.S. Of being, you think about the Billie Holiday song and other kinds of things. Strange fruit. Mulberry, which has a really great history, personal history, but also a great history in the U.S. of being linked to attempts to make silk industry, which is very fascinating. Yeah. Sycamore, and then the cotton shrub, I think. Yeah.
Can we do a quick lightning round to get at each of them?
Yes. I love lightning round.
Yeah, just like a word or a phrase for each.
Yeah.
Okay. Cotton shrub.
Cotton shrub. African enslavement, but also African ingenuity for growing cotton.
Apple.
Apple, it's like a gift, allowing, as I said, those to start that city in Blackton, but also a unique link to Harriet Tubman.
Really?
Yes.
Oh my God.
Sycamore.
Sycamore. I love sycamore because it's the one that's large enough to do lots of different things, including to hide away.
Mulberry.
Mulberry, as I said, linked to silk industry in a very fascinating way with some great stories there.
Poplar.
Poplar, strange fruit, right? But also a very good link to some things that happened to me in high school. I graduated from the historic Little Rock Central High, and it's featured in that chapter.
Wow.
Yeah.
Oak.
Oak, it's, I go back to those beautiful oaks. It's the start of it all. Yeah.
Willow.
Willow is one, that chapter is so deeply meaningful to me because of its link to one of the largest anti-Black racist events in Arkansas that my grandfather lived through, and I didn't know until I wrote this book.
Wow.
And pecan.
Pecan, family stories of pecan. My family grew up with pecan groves, and pecan has some fascinating histories also linked with African Americans in the South.
And you might have some recipes, I imagine.
Well, I have to tell you that one of the funniest things is trying to pull out the family stories and trying to talk to some of the 70 and 80-year-olds in my family about their memories. And we kept getting to who had the best pecan pie recipe and whose pecan pie is pretty, but you might not want to really eat it. I have all the secrets.
But how did you key in on the trees and the plant, I guess?
Yes.
That you did arrive at? Where did you find that these were the ones that are interesting in biology as well as in human history, in African American history?
Yeah. No, it's a great question because I started with a couple more trees. I think magnolia was one of them. And in each case, I would start to just look into the stories archive, other places to see what's known about how this is connected to. Some of them, it was obvious. Poplar, yes. Oak, yes. And then things like willow might not have seemed obvious, but there was this deep family connection. So I said, that's a place to start. And then I would go from there and ask, is there enough that it feels like I can make this full kind of chapter from it that does have the personal, but also the plant science I have for everybody.
So how did you, a storytelling biologist, go about writing this book? All the research that had to go into it. What did you do? Where did you go?
Yes.
Who did you talk to?
It's a fascinating question. because I became someone who works in the archives, which is very different from where I started. But in many ways, I don't see it as different from the ways in which my career as a plant scientist evolved. So I trained with a chemist and do plant biochemistry, looking at proteins, very specific kinds of things. But as I was working with plants and became interested in not just what the proteins were doing, but what that meant for the whole plant, we started doing ecology. We started doing all kinds of things. And so even in my science career, I have followed the question I'm interested in and learned the methodology I need to learn to answer that question. So for me, when I started working on this book, I thought, okay, well, the stories of my family are in genealogy. So I went back to this sister, my sister Renee, who dragged me to the former plantation. She's our family genealogist. And I said, I want to know what do you know? Who in our family was farmers? And she said, oh, you're interested now in genealogy, are you? And my son says, oh, you're going to write a whole book starting with the tree that you didn't want to go see. So they don't let me live it down. So she really took me into her world. So she's, a member of an Arkansas Genealogical Society. I went to some virtual conferences with her. I am not a historian, but I decided that I could use my understanding of research. So at the core, when you get an advanced degree, you learn how to be a researcher. And so I have these skills of research, and where I hit a wall, I go to my friends. So I know lots of people who study history, and I said, I'm going to go and do this. Does that make sense? And they said, well, go do it and then come back and talk to me. So, I spend a lot of time asking questions of people who have that expertise in methodology, which is the same thing you do in science if you want to learn a new methodology. But also, I decided that even though I don't know the word I have, it's not trepidation. I'm intrigued that the new book is being described kind of in the history category because I'm not a historian. But I think that if we know we have a story to tell, you figure out how to tell it. And if I tell the story and historians tell me I got it wrong, at least I got connected with them to get corrected. So once I get over the fear of, is someone going to say, did she do this as a historian would? No, I didn't, because I'm a plant biochemist interested in the history of these trees, interested in the history of African Americans in the U.S. And so I think sometimes we talk ourselves out of doing something because of fear of judgment. And it goes back to my being committed to the enthusiasm of the story. And one thing I'm clear about is the story that I'm able to tell in When Trees Testify is one that I'm uniquely positioned to tell as a plant scientist, as someone who was raised by parents who grew up in the segregated South and were impacted by a lot of these things, as someone who's deeply interested in how plants and humans interact. And so if I get it wrong in some cases, I'm getting it wrong so that I can be invited to get it right. And that's just the way I look at it.
I love that it's this interdisciplinary book. So what was maybe a very surprising thing that you learned while researching this book?
I think the most surprising was this connection of my family with willow trees and a story about Elaine, Arkansas. And I learned just because in 2019 there was a story about a memorial willow tree that was desecrated. And when they mentioned the town name, I said, I know that town. I think my grandfather was born there. And it just unraveled into this deep story that certainly someone in the family knew, but we had not gotten to know. And so the writing became a way to honor my late grandfather's history, who was my front porch rocking chair buddy. Like, he was super quiet, but I would sit there and read for hours with him. And now I think about all these things he carried that I didn't get to know while he was alive. But writing allows me to capture it for our family and for future generations.
So did you start with family stories?
No, so I have to tell you, that's a very interesting story. So my agent and I made a very strategic decision that we knew I love to tell stories. In the first book, getting the plant science and science communication part of it, I had a lot of experience with lessons from plants. And so because we knew there might be stories in this, we chose an editor, Retha Powers at Whole 2. Her strength really is with literary nonfiction. And so initially, I only had a couple of stories in a couple of chapters. And then it became clear maybe there's more stories that kind of links this as a thread. And there were stories for every tree that were personal to different degrees. And I actually initially resisted it because it started to feel like a memoir. It's not a memoir, but I never really had interest in anything memoirish. And yet those stories were tying together the plant science knowledge with the larger kind of history focus in a way that became deeply impactful.
I want to talk about, the Black Botanists group that
Yes.
you founded or helped found.
Co-founded, yeah.
Co-founded.
So I want to acknowledge the lead founder was Tanisha Williams.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I'm also thinking about like Black farmers
Yes.
who have
Yes.
kind of like
Yes.
reclaiming farming for the modern.
Yes. Yeah.
So talk to me more about that and what that's been like.
Yeah, so it's been some of that I have encountered through individuals that I've met. So I was called together with a group of African American women to dream about supporting Black girls through mentoring. And one of the people I met there was Bria Baker. She had a book out last year. I think it's called Rooted. I forget the subtitle, but she talks a lot about reclaiming land ownership, some of which is linked to farming. And through her and then through other research that I did, there's a whole group of people who are really working in this space of African Americans reclaiming a kind of space in farming. I mentioned some of them in the book because some of them have been powerful. I'm not calling forward all the names now, but there's a powerful group actually working on farming of cotton and the kind of, cognitive dissonance that's sometimes there. But even in the apple chapter, there are people who are doing fruit farms and other kinds of farming, some of it urban farming, some of it I worked with some or got to know about some work that was happening in places like Jackson, Mississippi, that are devastated economically and have kind of food deserts. And a lot of farming communities for Black people have emerged there to try to say, how do you deal with food insecurities through reclaiming the ability to farm? So there are all these interesting ways and a lot of interesting individuals who are working in that space, many of whom I had the privilege to try to call their name and to mention their work in some of the chapters, particularly in the last chapter. I think I talk about some of them.
It sounds like this book took you a lot of places.
It took me a lot of places. And, there were times where I said, okay, we'll see when it comes together. But I've been really proud of, you have to read it many, many times. You finish the first draft, you read it and read it. And each time I've read it, I thought this came together in a way that I truly feel that I met the goal of that I wanted. I believe as writers, we should write the things that we're uniquely positioned to write. And I hope that I did that. I know I didn't do it all because I have other books in me, but I tried to do it the best I could in this context around trees.
Yeah. I love that you are shedding light on Black botanical legacy,
Yes.
as you say, which is massive.
Often when we think about botanical legacy of African Americans in the U.S., we go immediately to trauma. And yet so much of what we've been able to accomplish in the U.S. starts with the science knowledge of an enslaved African. So, for pecans, it is an enslaved African named Antoine. I really wanted to be able to ask, where are there other examples, even if we can't call the names of people? And it's throughout the book. In the apple chapter, there were master apple cider makers that their primary job when they were enslaved was to take care of the apples and make cider for people. So George Washington and others have kind of people whose names we know, some mentioned in the book, who were working in that capacity. So there's all of this botanical expertise that exists in the hands of enslaved African Americans and Black Americans that we don't get to celebrate. And part of that, engaging in that started when I was doing Black Botanist Week. And as I was reading and pursuing research and history, there's so much there. And part of it was for me to ask, as the first professional botanist or plant scientist in my family, what does it mean to be able to ask, what legacy am I carrying? And I realized that there are so many botanists. I'm not a first-generation botanist. I'm the first professional botanist, but I started with my mom. She was clearly a botanist. My mom can keep any plant alive better than I can to this day, right? I didn't do much better breaking them up and understand what happens within them. And so she's not even the only one. As we started to look at the genealogy in the family, my mother's father was self-employed as a farmer. That's a botanist.
Yeah.
And so it really was to ask, what is it for me to rediscover what it means for me to carry the legacy of a botanist, and what would it mean if I offered that through this writing for people who choose to re-engage what Black botanical legacy is in the U.S. and to celebrate, not just mourn. I think enslavement is a tragedy, and yet we can't give up the expertise. We can't give up all the things that we also possessed within that. But what powerful legacy am I reclaiming? And not just reclaiming for my own career, but to offer it through this work for those who choose to. And I think it's even more important in this moment where I would argue an acknowledgement and celebration of Black history in the U.S. is under attack. When I look back, I've done a lot of work in my career as a plant scientist through some of my disciplinary societies, one, the American Society for Plant Biology, and others, trying to encourage individuals from minoritized and underrepresented backgrounds to get into botany and agriculture. And sometimes we do meet this kind of, is it a valuable career? Is there a land trauma? So I think we have to acknowledge land trauma and say that it's something, if we acknowledge it, we can walk through it.
Could you define it?
Land trauma is this sense that my ancestors spent all of this time captured working on the land. The last thing I want to do is to build a career working on land, right? I have a choice to do something else. But for me, it became I have a choice to re-embrace that and reclaim that legacy in different ways. And I think we have to have examples of what that looks like. You hear public historian and public economists all the time. Someone says she's a public plant biologist. And I thought, okay. But I think that's part of the plant evangelist work, to say that we can lean into this work and acknowledge the trauma, but not let the trauma pull me away from what I think of as an intergenerational legacy of expertise. But we have to have spaces to talk about that. And if you don't, you can easily go back into kind of land trauma. The truth is, as well, farming, if you think about traditional farming, is not always a lucrative career in the U.S. So when people are thinking about careers they want to go into to transform their lives, that may or may not be one. It's often a kind of family, multi-generational kind of thing. But I think that there are some interesting examples now of how that doesn't have to be the case. And so I think that Black botanical legacy, also, we just have to acknowledge the reality that, and I'm a little radical in that regard, this country is not set up to celebrate Black legacy in a lot of ways. We will celebrate Black legacy in sports. We will celebrate Black legacy in entertainment. But often in other areas, we don't celebrate it in ways that people are drawn to think that's the career that I want. And so I do think part of, I said to someone that activism takes lots of forms. And sometimes, as we've seen with protests in the U.S., it's about marching with signs. My greatest form of activism has been to live and present this career in a way that you can do Black feminist work through plant science, right? I think Black botanical legacy in claiming that, and of course we did it together with Black Botanist Week, has been to say we're here, and how we want to live out our careers hopefully will be an invitation for people to think that getting connected back to the land doesn't always have to be trauma, but it can be reclaiming legacy.
I love the title of your new book,
Yes.
When Trees Testify. And I love the evocative story that you tell about the oak tree
Yes.
and your revelation that, man, this tree has seen things.
Yes.
So what are these trees testifying to?
I think it's so many things. When you mentioned oak, I thought about one of the impactful things that really hit me when I was writing this too is that in one of the countries on the west coast of Africa where enslaved people were being captured and shipped away, there is an oak tree, an African oak called the tree of forgetting. And they used to walk them around it several times so that they would forget before they would get on the ship and then come over. And when I learned about that, I thought they're not going to forget, right? But just to think that you left an oak tree and one of the first things you might have seen based on where the ships were coming in were oak trees. And so, for me, it's a legacy of existence before and after. And the fact that their actually captured breath is there, they're actually still holding up the tree. They were there. And when you think about the ways in which the people who would have been on a plantation the majority of them would have been the enslaved people, African Americans. Those rings has a lot of their breath captured in it. And I just think about, like, they are physically there. The trees are testifying to what they witnessed. They testifying to their lives lived. They're testifying that they held up community as they're holding up the tree. And I think about that a lot now, like what it means, because we live with trees and they're capturing our breath. I've thought a lot about what it means that later people might reflect back on our lives if they think about this same perspective of our breaths being captured in a tree.
Mm-hmm.
And personally, I have become obsessed with the idea of what it means for me to live a life worthy of a tree capturing my breath and carrying the memory of my presence into the future. And that's why for me it was When Trees Testify, because when I really thought, it's the first time I said it just kind of willy-nilly. Yep, those trees are captured our breath. And my sister said, "What?" And I said, "Yeah." So I explained to her and she said, "Oh my God," right? And then I started to think that scientifically for me it's a very simple thing. Yep, they capture our breath. But then when you think about, they are really all the memories that trees have of the captured breath. But like even when you see a bend, right? So the trees in Jamaica where I just was during Hurricane Melissa, some of them bent. And they will correct that, but there'll be this curve that will be the memory of Hurricane Melissa. And someone might come along and not remember that. But I just think about how powerful it is to think about what trees have witnessed and what that witness then offers for us in terms of testimony if we choose to try to observe, learn, and ask what we're going to do with that.
I love to think of you doing research
Yes.
in the lab
Yes.
and how different it must be to then put on your plant evangelist hat
Oh.
and instead write about, plants in a more a subtler, a non-scientific way. I mean, there's a lot of science in there, but you're talking about them in a more kind of
You tell stories.
Yeah, you tell stories.
I'm a storyteller.
Yeah.
And I think, I've been a storyteller my entire life, but I also see that as kind of part of an African-American tradition of being a griot. Being one who's descended from people who were enslaved in the U.S., there were times where they couldn't legally read or write, but you could never take storytelling away. And so for me, storytelling is part of that kind of intergenerational tradition. But storytelling for me is also about inviting people into my enthusiasm for the work. And I think very early, I was able to give myself a gift and realize that for me, I don't have to operate as a scientist from a perspective of always feeling like I have to impress people with my intelligence. And every time I get an opportunity to have a talk or to write, my question is, how can I invite the person I'm interacting with into my enthusiasm for plants? And I think the best way to do that is through accessibility. And, during the pandemic, I thought a lot about accessibility from different ways, right, in terms of taking things online and allowing things to be accessible. But the ways in which we talk about the knowledge we get is also a way for us to increase accessibility. And there are lots of words you can use that are scientific words, but there are other words you could use that allow others other than the people who've studied the very same thing you studied in. And that's my goal, is every day to ask, how can I invite people into my enthusiasm for the work in hopes that they'll understand and have an opportunity to increase their plant awareness. They may not, but they won't have the opportunity if things are so dense they can't understand it at all. So that's the real goal for me when I'm writing. And the best way for me to do that is through storytelling.
I mean, I think that in general, people have such a dry idea of what science is, right? Like, because really it's about discovery.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think it's also a lot of reasons people have that dry idea. They go back to the last biology or chemistry or physics class they had. And my scientists, and I had to fight it. We love to just transfer facts. We want to make sure, I taught biochemistry. We want to make sure people can diagram and distinguish all of the amino acids. And, the real reality of scientists are that we don't have, like, I'm not going to draw all the 20 amino acids for you right now. I can get to it pretty quickly. We know how to remember important parts of facts, the things that we need to, and then how to get to the facts quickly. And we don't live in the economy where I grew up where you had to memorize everything or get to the encyclopedia. The facts are there. So I think we have to teach people, why would you want to know the fact? Why is it important to be able to distinguish leucine from tryptophan? Like, why is that important? And if you can get people excited about that, they'll want to learn the facts. But unfortunately, we often default to facts in science classes, and then people default back to the trauma they had of not being able to get it right. And I just refuse to be that kind of scientist. I don't want to scare people off with the facts. I truly want to pull them in with the enthusiasm. We used to have so much fun in my biochemistry classes. I mean, just so much fun. And one of the students had worked in my lab. They were like, it's true. No, I'm telling you, she's truly that enthusiastic. And that takes me back to the professor who won me over to plant physiology with enthusiasm. And I think if you think back to the classes you love the most, it's not always the subject, it's the delivery. And so what delivery is going to invite people who wouldn't otherwise pick up a plant science book to pick it up and become interested in it?
When you remind me that photosynthesis, it's plants making food out of sunlight.
Isn't that? We can't do anything that cool.
No.
It's magic. It's total magic.
It is. It absolutely. How could you not be anything but exciting and excited about that and want to share with other people, so.
And the trees can't write books, but they seem to have made a friend of
They made friends, and I try to honor what they share with me as best I can. A lot of people have been introduced to thinking about the life and community of plants through a couple of different books. One of them was The Secret Life of Plants that came out, I don't know, I'm going to say a couple decades ago. And then Peter Wohllman's work around trees has just been fascinating. He's written several great books about nature. And I think that those books have been amazing for getting people who don't think about how plants are existing on a day-to-day basis and how they're existing in communities. I think one of the things that I have watched is, and I think probably now I sit at that same interface, there's often this tension between plant scientists wanting to make sure the plant science is right with popular books that get people very interested in science. And so I think about not only those books, which are science communication books, but I think about also The Understory, which was a popular fiction book that got people thinking a lot about trees. And there are times where I'm frustrated by plant scientists saying that didn't quite get it right. And I think, well, don't we want to invite people to be excited and have conversations about the plant? And I think those kinds of books have been really ground shifting in a lot of ways for getting people who wouldn't otherwise pick up a book. My goal has always been that I could write a book that would be as accessible as some of those. But if a plant scientist read it, they would say, okay, she also translated the plant science right. Not saying that they're not. There are different purposes. I believe we need all of those if it increases people's plant awareness and starts them down a path to understand more about their plant neighbors and kin, as I think of them. Yes.
As a Radcliffe Fellow.
Yes.
What are you working on?
So this year, in addition to launching When Trees Testify in January, I have been working on a new project, working with a research partner on a new project where I'm very interested in the relationship that a number of Black feminists had with plants or trees. It started with my fascination with Octavia Butler, who has some real interest in plants and trees, but there are other people, Jamaica Kincaid. And we're doing some exploration of which individuals I want to pursue further. And we've also, since we've been here, this is the beauty of being at the Radcliffe Institute, in our ability to be introduced to the Schlesinger Library. One of the librarians pointed out that there are the papers of Sarah Thomas Curwood, I believe, who was an African-American educator. She was a sociologist, but she was also a tree farmer. And so my research partner and I are doing some archival work, just looking at what that meant for her, but also doing some other work, reading and looking into different resources, just pursuing a number of angles on the intersection between Black feminists and botany. And I think about Lessons from Plants When Trees Testify all as this kind of series of plants offering us wisdom and knowledge for us to contemplate and use. And I hope that those things that I'm able to produce are a gift, but also an invitation.
Thank you for elevating my plant awareness.
I'm so happy. That was the goal, and I'm glad that it was successful for me.
And I can't wait to read your book.
Thank you so much.
I'm really excited for it.
Thank you. That concludes today's program.
BornCurious is brought to you by Harvard Radcliffe Institute. Our producer is Alan Grazioso. Anna Soong and Cabin 3 Media provided editing and production support. Many thanks to Jane Huber for editorial support. And we are your co-hosts. I'm Ivelisse Estrada.
And I'm Heather Min.
Our website, where you can listen to all our episodes, is radcliffe.harvard.edu/BornCurious.
If you have feedback, you can email us at info@radcliffe.harvard.edu.
You can follow Harvard Radcliffe Institute on Blue Sky, Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, and Threads. And as always, you can find BornCurious wherever you listen to podcasts. Thanks for learning with us.
And join us next time.